Okay, we have the season 15.8 patch notes. They're going to be nerfing Gwen, Lulu, Tristana, Yone, Yorick, Yuumi. They're going to be buffing Blitzcrank, Brand, Hui, Mel, Renekton, Shen, Sin, Sona, Xerath, Zeri, and Zoe, while adjusting Annie, Ari, and Syndra. And they're going to be making changes to Crypt Bloom, Deadman's Plate, Opportunity, and it looks like they're adding Overlord's Bloodmail back into the game. So let's go ahead and take a look. First things first, they're going to be ending the first rank split. Of course, this isn't really going to change anything because there's no, ranked reset or anything like that this year. We only had the one at the start of the year. So although we're still going to have splits, they're just thematic splits. So the thematic Noxus split is going to end on April 29th, which is in 2 weeks. Basically, the next patch will be the first patch of Split 2, but your rank's not going to get reset, so it's not really going to change anything about the ladder. It's just going to change missions and that sort of thing, their battle pass things and that sort of thing. For champions, Ari has armor growth decreased from 4.7 to 4.2 per level. Her W damage is going from 45 to 145 to 40 to 120, so that's also being nerfed. But the AP ratio on her W is going from 30% to 40%. And then this has maximum damage if you're hitting, multiple bolts. So that's going from 72 to 232 to 64 to 192. And the AP ratio is also going up on that one, of course, from 48% to 64%. The cooldown is going up, however, from 9 to 5 seconds to 10 to 6 seconds. And her E charm is going from 80 to 240 to 80 to 240, but the AP ratio is going up by 10% from 75% to 85%. Overall, it looks like these changes, was this one of the adjustments? Yeah, it looks like these changes are really more targeted at adjusting how RA scales, because I think that they feel pretty power neutral. But we'll have to see how they play out. So it's also a little bit interesting because, of course, nerfing the armor growth nerfs her scaling, but increasing AP ratios on both her E and her W increase her scaling. I guess, so that's a little bit strange. Maybe they could have hit her base armor here, but I don't know. Armor growth obviously isn't that important on a champion like Ari anyways, so these are probably some pretty nice changes. Annie, her health growth is going from 102 to 96, so they're nerfing her health growth. And her Q damage is going from 70 to 210 to 70 to 210, but 75% AP to 80% AP. So she's getting less health per level, but she's getting 5% AP ratio on her Q. And then her W is going from 70 to 250 to 70 to 270. So she gets a little bit of extra damage, once she's putting kind of her last couple of points into, well, I guess it starts with the second point into W, but once she maxes W out, she's going to have a little bit more damage. AP ratio is staying the same there, and then the cooldown is going down by a second from 8 to 7. So far, I would say this is a buff, right? Like, health is obviously a very important stat, but similar to the armor growth on a champion like Ari, obviously a champion like Annie isn't relying that much on her HP. In most cases, you're hopefully not getting hit that much. And so having, higher AP ratios and that sort of thing, or more damage on a shorter cooldown, or a little bit more base damage here in W is really nice. Let's see what they did with Tibbers. New passive bonus magic penetration. That is crazy. And they're just giving you 10 to 15% magic penetration, depending on how many points you have in ult. This is really crazy because Annie has one of the highest AP ratios on an ult of any champion in the game. And therefore, she has some of the highest total AP ratios in her kit of any champion in the game. And so giving her some magic penetration built into her kit is really, really powerful because she does so much base damage, and she does so much damage when she buys AP as well. So very high base damage and very high, AP ratios. The reason for the super high AP ratios on her ult is because Tibbers doesn't just do damage when he's fired and instantly hits. He also does a lot of damage when he's hitting people. And so depending on if you're able to get a really good ult off where you're continuing to run somebody down, then you do an insane amount of damage on Annie. So having that amplified, with this magic penetration is really insane. And even if we look at these first couple of changes, I wouldn't say that those are a nerf or anything like that. This is probably a buff, so this is huge. Let's see what else they're doing, though. Okay, so maybe this is getting changed, though. I was going to say, you have to compensate for something, especially if they're calling this an adjustment instead of a buff. So the flame aura around Tibbers is going from 20 to 40 damage to 8 to 16 damage. So they are nerfing Tibbers, aura damage around him quite significantly, which is what we were just talking about. But they're still leaving it in place. And of course, her entire rest of her kit is going to be amplified by the magic penetration here. So it would be interesting to see where that breaks even. And then Tibbers' auto attack damage is also going down from 50 to 100 to 30 to 60, which is a pretty significant nerf, I would say. And then 15% AP to 10% AP. Overall, I think that this is still a slight buff to Annie. But it would be really interesting to see, how much extra damage are you going to get from this magic penetration, and, how is that going to affect, where's the break-even point from all this damage you're losing here on Tibbers, but you're gaining all of this. Another thing that's really important, though, is that a lot of times Annie is hopefully looking to one-shot or at least kill the person before they get un-CC'd by her passive. And while you are taking damage away here, and quite a significant amount, it's only in those scenarios, like I said, where you're using Tibbers to chase somebody down, deal damage with its aura, and actually auto-attack people. Ideally on Annie, you don't even want to do that, right? You want to just one-shot somebody. So this is going to take some power away from the DPS that she does if Tibbers is just running at people, and shift it into her just bursting people a lot heavier. And Annie already has a ton of burst. If you get flash R'd by Annie, you're pretty much dead. So, I don't know. There's a couple of angles you could look at this from. One would be that because she wants to just one-shot you anyways, this is a really nice change because it helps you one-shot her target a lot easier. The other angle you could look at it from is, since she's probably one-shotting you anyways if she's doing this magic penetration isn't doing a whole lot. But if in the scenarios where she doesn't one-shot you, then you're in trouble on Annie because you're losing a lot of this damage that you would need in a scenario where you can't one-shot somebody. So that's quite an interesting change. Anyways, Blitzcrank passive shield increase, Q damage increased. So his shield is going from 30% of his maximum mana to 35% of his maximum mana. Not really a big deal. It's not very much. And, obviously most Blitzcrank players aren't really building around this or anything like that. His Q rocket grab is going from 105 damage to 285 damage to 110 to 310. So that's quite a significant damage buff on his Q. AP ratio is staying the same. So both of them are buffs. So it's, these are nice little buffs for Blitzcrank. And I definitely agree. I think Blitzcrank is in a spot right now where having a little bit of extra damage on his Q really obviously just rewards the best players playing the champion who are actually hitting, the hardest part of his kit and the most important part of his kit, but giving him a little bit of extra damage to make sure that he can actually get kills more often when he hits hook, instead of it being such a negative thing. I think over the years in League, Blitzcrank Q has just felt less and less rewarding. You'll hit the Q and oftentimes it's actually bad for your team, or you just don't have the damage to kill somebody. And that seems crazy for a champion like Blitzcrank, especially, who I think is such a fun support champion and kind of a staple champion for the game. So, nice little changes there. Brand passive ablaze damage per tick to monsters, 215% to 240%. So this is going to help his clear speed quite a bit. Let's see. They say they buffed the damage cap per tick last patch, but it didn't see the win rate movement that they were shooting for, and Brand Jungle is still extremely weak. So it's really hard to say then if their buff last time really missed the mark. These aren't crazy numbers for jungle, but I mean, he is applying his passive all the time. It's really hard to say, with these jungle type changes. I'm not a jungler, and so it's not super intuitive to me what, a 25% increase to Brand's passive damage against monsters is really going to do for his clear speed in the jungle. But if he's still looking really bad in the jungle, I don't know that this would be enough to push him over the edge. And it's certainly not as big as some of the crazy changes that we see that bring champions into the jungle, like introducing, from 0% extra damage to monster multiplier to, they'll just give the champion like 200%. Obviously, Brand has already gotten that a long time ago, so this is just a small 25% increase. I don't know how much that's going to do. Gwen E damage decreased, so they've been dealing with Gwen for a while now. Let's see. Gwen's new power curve has added a lot of agency to her early game, but she's still a little too high power for her current shape and slightly too powerful early game. So they're taking damage away from her E, 12 to 20 to 8 to 20, and the AP ratio is staying the same. This is a very small amount of damage, so I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. So that's probably a very, very minor change. Probably one of the most minor changes we've seen so far on this patch. Hui could use a bit of a touch-up relative to the rest of the mage roster. Are we sure? Are we sure about that? Okay. Passive damage 30 to 180 to 35 to 230. That is a lot of damage. 180 to 230. That's a lot. And then the AP ratio is the same, and his R is going from 200 to 400 to 200 to 450. That's not as big of a deal. Like we've talked about before, as this is a champion that's obviously trying to find lethal when he's ulting. And so this will help in some situations, having an extra 25, having an extra 50. But it's the same rank 1. And when you get a damage buff on your ult, the thing is that you don't use it very frequently. So it's not really that big of a deal. Now, it does matter more for champions like Hui that are trying to burst you and kill you when they're using that ult, because it increases their lethal range, but you just don't get a lot of extra damage throughout a game from an extra 25 or 50 damage, once every minute or two that you're using your ult. It's just too infrequent. But, on a champion like Hui, obviously using that ult to finish people, having a little bit of extra, room to find lethal there is pretty nice. Lulu, they've been hitting Lulu a little bit. She's insane in my opinion. Really busted champion. I don't know that this is enough, and I've played her since this nerf already, and again, kind of similar to what we talked about with Annie's HP per level, or or Ahri's armor per level. Lulu should just never be relying that much on her base HP. If you're really, living on Lulu by 30 HP, you probably didn't play the fight correctly in the first place. And so I just feel like there are very few scenarios where this 30 HP matters. Now, of course, it's not like it's a meaningless change, because in lane, where you are trading and you are fighting, and you are all-inning and stuff like that, I'm sure that this will make a lot of difference in solo queue games and stuff like that. But if you think about it, Lulu is not a champion that should be relying on her HP. So if she's still one of the strongest supports in the game by far, taking 30 HP away from her is probably just not going to do it. And it's obviously not what's making her strong. So yeah, there's the whole issue with that. This change feels like, you might read it and think, oh, I'm going to kill Lulu a lot more in lane. But in reality, I think that this just doesn't matter in the vast majority of fights, because Lulu should never let you get on her. And think about this, of course, better Lulu players and people who are abusing it in higher elo are going to achieve that even better than at lower ranks. So this is a change that makes Lulu worse at lower ranks and makes her like it's just a small change in high elo. So this skews her more towards being like stronger comparatively in high elo compared to low elo. And I don't know, I think that she's dominating in high elo, so doing a change that affects low elo more than high elo doesn't make any sense. Mel held 600 to 630, so they're giving her an extra 30 HP. And her passive damage per stack is going from 5 to 20 to 8 to 25, and the AP ratio is staying the same. This is all fine. I don't know that Mel is that bad, but they're saying they previously nerfed her due to the ban rate she was seeing, but she's weak, and we're looking to cautiously bring some power back. Let me just check real quick, and see what's going on with Mel, because I'm a little bit unfamiliar with how well she's doing right now. Let's see. Yeah, a little bit weak, by the way. 54% win rate and 80 carry, 18% ban rate. I guess that is on this patch. So let's go to the previous patch, because that's with the buffs that she just got, right? Let's take a look. Where is Mel? I don't even see her. Maybe she was so bad. Oh, there she is. She was sitting at a 48% win rate, 2% pick rate, and a 20% ban rate for some reason. The people banning Mel are trolling on the last patch. I guess she's probably being played a little bit in mid as well. 46% in mid, low pick rate, super high ban rate. I guess people just hate Mel. But obviously, I mean, we can see the results already. Mel's win rate has shot way, way, way up. It's early into the patch, though, so some of these numbers can be skewed. Not doing too well in mid. But, I mean, she saw huge increases in mid as well. This pushed her win rate up quite a bit. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't know that Mel was super weak, but I guess she was, according to the numbers at least. I wonder if that's like a high elo skewed thing. Like if I go to Master Plus on the previous patch, was she doing fine? No, she was doing pretty bad on Master Plus as well, about the same. Yeah, even worse in mid. So I don't know. Maybe she was doing bad, but people really hate playing against that champion. So it's really interesting that they're rushing to instantly buff her back to life. These aren't that big of changes, but apparently they're having a really positive impact, so I don't know what to tell you about that. Renekton are 30 to 90 damage to 30 to 120 damage. Then the ratios are staying the same. He's been underperforming. I just don't see... Maybe that's a big deal. I mean, it is... I believe... Is this the damage per second, or is this like the total amount of damage that you can deal with this? I'm not really sure, but because obviously that'd make a huge difference. I mean, if this is like 30 damage a second, that's quite a lot. But I don't know. It's a weird thing to buff. Like, even if Renekton's not doing well, weird thing to buff. I don't think that his R, damage that he does around him makes that big of an impact, or is like what makes the champion good or bad is not dependent on this whatsoever. So it's just a weird angle to buff the champion. And I'm again not really even sure the size of the... We can look him up, I guess. I'm not really sure the size of the buff, because it would depend on if this is like the damage per second or what's going on. Magic damage per tick, 30 to 120. So, wow. He deals magic damage every 0.5 seconds. It's actually even worse because, so it says per tick, not per second, obviously, because every tick is half a second. So this is dealing an extra 30 damage every half a second. That's crazy That's a huge buff. So it's a good thing I looked this up, because I was going to say, like, because this part of his kit doesn't seem like that big of a deal, or the main thing that makes Renekton good or bad, it seemed like, oh, kind of whatever. But obviously, if we're talking about, I mean, I guess we're not talking about 30 damage, because this would be like level 16. But if we're talking about even, at rank 2, an extra 15 damage every half a second, so an extra 30 damage every second, that makes a big difference. Like, that's a lot of extra damage to be getting for free. It's a little bit of a weird place to start buffing a champion like Renekton. But obviously this is a pretty big buff, I would say. That's a lot of extra damage. There's just no way around that. I mean, his ult lasts for a long time. This is going to deal a lot of extra damage over the course of his ult. Shen, Q slow increased, W cooldown decreased. So the slow when moving away from Shen is 15 to 35% to 25% to 45%. Okay, so that's pretty big. Yeah, that's a really nice buff to his slow. And then his cooldown on his W going from 18 to 12 to 16 to 10. This is also an extremely nice buff, but again, going to be high elo skewed. I don't think people in low elo really know how to use his W well or play around it at all. And so I don't think you're going to be able to take advantage of an extra 2 seconds being shaved off. But I think in high elo, this is quite a nice change to his W, because it's a really powerful ability, actually. It's just something that people, I think, usually don't use all that well. But, this is actually a pretty big deal. And the slow is really nice for trading. Shen has some really nice trades in lane. So being able to get more of a slow on that and be able to get extra auto attacks in on somebody because of the slow is really big, I think. Singed. Passive per target cooldown decreased. Last patch's changes were directionally positive, but ended up slightly more power down than intended. Reverting the passive cooldown change, as it's a more fun thing for Singed players to have access to. Yeah, I agree. I think I saw this in the last patch, and I was thinking, like, why would they want Singed to not be able to reapply his passive to, someone that he's fighting or chasing? Like, it's just unintuitive, and it seems like, obviously, Singed players would have a lot more fun or would like it if it just didn't work that way, even if they had to take power from something else. So the per target cooldown on the passive is going from 10 to 8 seconds. So that's nice. Sona, Q bolt damage increased at higher ranks. So from 50 to 170 to 50 to 190, and the AP ratios are staying the same. This is a very small buff that's not going to do a whole lot. Most of Sona's value obviously comes in her scaling, and really a lot of the value that she gets from her Q is just managing to hit it on 1 or 2 people to stack her passive rather than the damage that she's dealing. And because she's not getting access to almost any damage early, like rank 1, this is going to be, nothing. And then rank 2, which doesn't come until you're like level 4, is just going to be 5 damage. And so it's just ramping up really slowly, only to give you an extra 20 damage on your Q, which is just by the time it's maxed and you're like level 9 or something like that. Actually, I don't even know. You would max Q in lane on Sona, but I'm not even sure that you would continue fully maxing Q. I think a lot of people like maxing W on Sona, but we don't need to look into that right now anyways. But yeah, so that's obviously a problem. Like, a lot of people would put, for example, 3 points into Q on Sona, then max W, then return to maxing Q. So if you do something reasonable like that, or you even max W completely, which I think some people are starting to do a little bit more on Sona nowadays, since that's so much for power in her kit, I think that this feels kind of weird, Okay, Syndra, W force of will, slow 25% to 45% to 25%. Wow. We're adjusting Syndra's incentives to make her more of a burst mage and less of a full mobility kiter. Okay. E-scatter the weak 75 to 235 damage to 60 to 200 damage. And the AP ratio is going up from 45% to 60%. So they cut her base damage by quite a lot, but her AP ratio is way up on her E. And then her R is going from 100 to 180 to 90 to 170, but from 17% AP to 20% AP. So there's only a 3% AP ratio increase. So to match an extra 10 damage that you're missing, you're going to need 300 AP. I think this is just a nerf. What about over here? Like we've got 15% AP ratio. We're losing 35 damage, at least at the final rank. So to get to 30 damage, you'd need 200 AP. So you need a little bit more than 200 AP to make up for this. Less if you're at earlier ranks in your E. So her E, I think at most stages of the game, her E is just losing damage. Her R is losing damage. And her slow is way down. Although you probably... What do you max on Syndra? Do you max W third? Because if you max W third, then this slow thing, which sounds gigantic to go from 45% to 25%, but if you max W third, then it's not really that big of a deal. Uh-oh, it looks like people... This may have changed actually because of the patch though. Looks like people were maxing W... Yeah, people maxed W second. Okay, so now let's think about that with that context. So that's not as bad then, because... Oh, no. Well, the slow thing is worse, because if you were maxing W third, at least, you know, the slow would be the same for a long time in the game. But actually, people did max W second on Syndra. So as a result, you're going to see, you know, as you start putting points into this, a huge decrease in the slow. And as for her E, you know, you are seeing, you know, only 15 damage at like rank 1 as opposed to like 35 at rank 5. So you do have a much lower break-even point for how much ability power you need to have when there's not very many points in your E to do the same amount of damage. And since you're going to have E level 1 or level 2 for a very long time, that makes this not so bad. But she is basically losing damage on her E, her R, and her W slow is being decreased by quite a bit for most of the game, considering what she maxes. So I don't really see how they're trading... How are they making her more of a burst mage and less of a full mobility kiter? Maybe they feel like she already has sufficient burst with her ult and with her abilities, so they're just nerfing her. But yeah, I mean, this is just nerfing her across the board. So that's kind of somewhat contrary to what they're saying here in the paragraph. Tristana R Buster Shot damage increased, or decreased, I mean, from 275 to 375 to 225 to 325. So that's losing 50 damage at all ranks. Kind of a big deal, especially because, and this is really annoying for Tristana players, you get used to when you can ult somebody away with E and kill them. And losing 50 damage means that you'll miscalculate a lot just based on habit. So this is like really annoying as a change for Tristana players. And like it punishes you for knowing the champion well, which I think really sucks when they make changes like this when they could just do other things. The ratios are staying the same. So she's just losing 50 damage off of her ult. Tristana is strong at virtually all points of the game. I have been seeing more Tristana, but I'm still not under the impression that Tristana is strong either. So I don't know about that. Okay, Xerath. Passive cooldown refund increased. Q damage increased. So cooldown reduction on killing a unit is going from 2.5 seconds to 3.5 seconds. To get his passive back up, which gives him mana when he hits something with his auto attack. And then his Q damage is going from 70 to 230 to 75 to 235. So it's gaining 5 at all ranks, and the AP ratio is staying the same. So this is a very small buff to Xerath on both things, but not going to make a big difference. I mean, we're talking about 5 damage on Q and, an extra 1 second shaved off of his passive cooldown when he kills a minion. Not that big of a deal, but slight buff to Xerath. Very small. Zeri, our Chain Lightning damage increased. Chain Lightning damage 25% of total AD to 30% of total AD. This is not a big enough buff. I think Zeri is terrible right now. Though Zeri's numbers look reasonable, she's completely fallen out of the bot lane meta, despite being popular in the past. I don't know what's going on with her numbers that make them look reasonable. I think Zeri is awful right now. It feels really bad to play with her. Like, there is not a single AD carry, other than, I guess, like some mages with Braum. There's not another AD carry champion that I hate laning with right now more than Zeri. I feel like the champion's completely useless. I understand that it's a scaling champion too, and that we have to play lane conservatively, but this champion can't lane at all. Like, this champion is completely useless, so I don't know what's going on with that. And Zeri's really, I'll say, she's a really rough champion to balance, it seems like, because either Zeri's giga broken or she's the most useless champion in the game, and there's no in between. And even when she feels like the most, useless champion in the game in lane, she's apparently still having reasonable win rates and numbers. So I don't know what you do to fix this champion, but the champion probably needs if not a rework, a structural redo of the numbers on her abilities and things like that, so that she can lane a little bit better but not scale as hard or something like that, so she can play the game. W damage decreased on Yuumi, 10 to 50 to 10 to 50, but then the target max HP damage is going from 10 to 14% to 8 to 12%. So he's losing 2% of the target's maximum HP on his W at all ranks. So, I mean, not a huge hit, but 2% max HP is a decent amount of damage, so that kind of sucks for him. We expected last patch to buff Yuumi, but based on how it went for Yasuo, we expected a much smaller impact to the changes than what we got. As a result, we're throwing in a small Yuumi nerf to land him where we expected to. So they accidentally overbuffed him a little bit. This isn't a huge change, but yeah, this is probably a sufficient, reasonable nerf then. Yorick, oh my god, didn't they just do a bunch of stuff to Yorick? Well, last patch's Yorick update was largely successful at giving him more access to his Mistwalkers and a fighting chance in the early game. That can't be right. Isn't Yorick supposed to be like an early lane bully? What do they mean giving him a fighting chance in the early lane? It also managed to significantly skew him toward jungle, where he's really overperforming. True. This follow-up patch is intended to give us better jungle versus lane levers so that we can tune him for his separate roles effectively. We expect these changes to be somewhat of a power drain for jungle Yorick and mostly neutral for his top lane gameplay. Okay, so they're changing his passive so that the monster damage taken on his ghouls, I assume, is going from 60% to 100%. Their damage on monsters, though, is going from... or damage to monsters is going from 60 to 70%. So they're actually buffing, it looks like his, if I understand this correctly, they're actually buffing his damage to camps. Minion damage taken unchanged. This is really strange to me. Now, maybe the monster damage taken going from 60 to 100% is like really massive. And so this, is just so much smaller than this that it's not that big of a deal. I don't really know how much damage his little ghouls take from monsters, so it's hard to say. But it seems he's like crazy OP in jungle, or at least was on the last patch. So it seems really insane to be like preemptively counter buffing his damage to camps. Morning Mist, 70 to 210, plus 100% AP. To 10% of target's max HP, plus 3% per 100 AP. So they've just completely changed how the damage works on his E. So the base damage is just going to be 10% of the target's max HP. So let's think about break-even points there real quick again. So if a target has 700 HP, then that would be 70. So that's pretty reasonable because like a champion, for example, is going to have around 700 HP right at level 1 in the beginning of the game. And then let's see, 210, so they'd need to have 2,100 HP. I think that that's pretty reasonable for the time that he has this max, and I assume he's maxing Q first, so you're not maxing this until second. So this seems pretty reasonable. I don't think Yorick was building a lot of AP, hopefully not. So this being 3%, 3%, I don't know why they wrote it so weird, but this being a 3% AP ratio instead of a 100% AP ratio is, oh, that's why it's written differently. This is an extra 3% target max HP per 100 AP. Okay, so let's think about that. So before, if you had 100 ability power, this would just be 100 damage. Now, if you're against a target that has, let's say, 2,000 HP, if you have 100 ability power, you're going to deal 3% of 2,000 HP, which is an extra 60 damage, which is a lot less than 100, and hopefully you weren't building AP anyways. So that's whatever. New monster damage cap, 50 to 150 plus 100% of AP. So they're adding, this is part of balancing the jungle thing out. They're going to add this cap in. Although, again, there's some weird break-even stuff here because they've completely changed the numbers here on this. So, like, how much HP do jungle camps have? For example, like a blue buff or something like that, even early on, is going to have 2,000 HP. And so if you're able to E that or something like that, these camps are going to have a lot more HP. But it's going to cap this so that even if it has like 2,100 HP, a camp is only going to take 150 instead of 210. So he will be doing less damage to camps because of this new monster damage cap. So that's good. New lane minion minimum damage, 70 to 210 plus 100% AP. So obviously, like, the minions don't have enough HP to make this 10% of target max HP very good. So they're making his E do the same amount of damage to minions as it would have before. This really overcomplicates the way the ability works, but if it allows them to kind of help balance jungle better, so be it, I guess. Yorick R, new mark only affects champions. Okay. These seem like pretty reasonable changes. Yorick was really performing like crazy in the jungle, so I wonder, we're only like a day into the patch, but I kind of wonder where a champion like Yorick is sitting right now in jungle after the changes. What is he gone? Oh my god. Down 26 spots, but I mean, he's sitting at 50% win rate, so this seems fine. Yep. Seems like that was very appropriate. Zoe Q Paddle Star damage fall off to secondary targets is being removed. Zoe struggles with wave clear more than most mid lane mages. True. We want this downside to still exist, but the extent of the downside has some room to be lessened, so we're moving damage reduction to targets beyond the first struck by Q. That's fine. Yuumi, passive heal decreased at lower ranks, E-shield decreased. Yuumi has risen up as one of the best supports recently, especially in higher skill brackets. What? Has she? I haven't played against a Yuumi in like years. 48%, but that's after the nerfs, so let's see. 49%. I think that she wasn't doing all that well, but the fact that she had risen to being the 7th most picked support in like Emerald Plus probably, yeah. Oh, who's playing this? I mean, she was doing pretty bad, but I think just the pick rate and the fact that people started banning this. So Yuumi, if Yuumi was coming back, yeah, she started shooting up to being one of the more frequently banned supports. So I think Riot was just scared of Yuumi returning to pro play or something like that. As soon as they started seeing her ban rate tick up and her play rate tick up, they were not going to wait for people to suddenly get good or something and figure out how to win 50% of their games on the champion. But I mean, I haven't seen this champion in solo queue in forever, and it's not good. It doesn't look like it was good by the numbers, especially in higher skill brackets, so I have no idea what they're talking about. Heal 25 to 110 to 20 to 110, so a little bit off of the heal early on. AP ratio is the same, and then her E shield is going from 80 to 180 to 65 to 165. So that's losing 15 at all ranks, I think, right? Yeah. These aren't super heavy nerfs, though. And as much as I hate Yuumi, I guess I'm glad to see that because I didn't think that the champion needed to be nerfed right now. So these aren't like massive nerfs to her heal. You know, it's -5 on her heal and -15 on her shield. And the -5 on her heal goes back to 0 as she levels up. You know, so it goes less and less and less. So this is a very small takeaway from her healing and shielding. Items, Crypt Bloom, ability haste from 15 to 20. I completely agree with this. I don't see anyone building this item anymore. So they're giving it some more ability haste. That seems great. Dead Man's Plate. The slow resistance stat on Dead Man's Plate has been too effective at covering a few champions' core weaknesses lately, and we feel like it's a good time to reduce the potency of the slow resist on a single purchase. So they're taking the slow resist down from 25% to 15%. That's fine, but my opinion, and this is mostly coming from a support player, not thinking about like top laners who are building it or whatever. I know that Dead Man's Plate is being built a lot right now, but the numbers to me don't suggest that Dead Man's Plate is that great of an item. So to see a significant nerf like -10% slow resistance and no cost adjustment, just -10% slow resistance, seems a bit strange to me. Maybe it's important that this item has slow resistance too. Like maybe that, you know, removing it completely is crazy. And so maybe I'm just not thinking about the top laners that like building it again. But at least as a support player, it seems to me like just get rid of the slow resistance on the item entirely and buff some other stuff about the item. Give it more health, make it cheaper, you know, give it a little bit of extra damage on hit. Something, you know. I would like to see the slow resistance from the item taken away completely and then just give it a bunch of other buffs. But even with the slow resistance at 25%, I didn't think this item was all that great. So, but it is being built a lot. So maybe I'm just not in the know about what top laners are able to do with this item right now, or junglers. But yeah, this item's like not buildable on support in my opinion, although people do. So I don't know. It feels bad to see an item like this get nerfed that I feel like is actually not in that great of a spot. Opportunity, lethality from 15 to 18. It's dropped in popularity over time. It could use a buff to make it more competitive. That's fine. I don't see a ton of opportunity. 15 to 18. Preparation, after being out of combat with enemy champions for 8 seconds, gain 11 for a melee champion or 7 for a ranged champion lethality. And it's being changed to after being out of combat with enemy champions for 8 seconds, gain 11 melee and 5 ranged lethality. So it's getting +3 lethality, and then melee champions are just getting that whole benefit, and it's exactly the same for them. Ranged champions won't be getting the full 3 lethality because at least when preparation is active, they'll be losing 2 lethality, so they're only getting +1 lethality. I assume this is to prevent ranged users like Corky or something like that from, you know, just starting to go crazy with the item. So that's fine. It's still a buff even to the ranged champions, so this seems totally reasonable. Overlord's Bloodmail. Oh, I said they added it back in the game. Apparently it's been in the game. That should tell you, again, support player here. So maybe I just don't know who's building the item or whatever. But the fact that I thought the game or the item wasn't in the game at all might tell you something about its power level. So we'll see what they do to it, right? Overlords has been fine, but not exceptionally powerful for most of its lifetime. We're looking to buff it. Okay, fine. Tyranny. Bonus AD equal to 2% of bonus health. Bonus AD equal to 2.5% of bonus health. So they're giving you a little bit more AD for the health that you have. This is actually quite a large increase, right? Because 0.5% on 2% is actually a 25% increase. So that's a really big increase to the amount of AD that you're getting from the item. I know that these are small numbers, right? But that makes a big difference. Retribution. 0 to 10% based on missing health bonus AD to 0 to 12% based on missing health bonus AD. So you're also going to get some more AD when you're missing HP. So yeah, these seem like good changes to the item. Maybe I'll see the item this year and remember that it is still in the game. Okay, we got ARAM changes and stuff like that. We don't care. Skin updates. Bug fixes, upcoming skins, and chromas. Let's pull up the previous patch as well when we talk about skins this time, because unfortunately I was gone and sick and I missed the last one, but I have to talk about the skins from the last patch. So I had been complaining, and we've been looking at skins in the patch notes videos since I made my video complaining about Riot basically not doing a good job of monetizing the game and selling skins that I think people would find really enjoyable and want to buy. And one of the big problems that I had, we're all blurry, is that they lost their way and went from making all of these fun skins that were really individual skins for specific champions and started releasing everything together in themes. And I don't think that the idea of doing all these skins that look exactly the same in themes is a good way to sell skins. Maybe it is a decent way for certain skin lines to exist like that. Maybe it helps with production. It should be a piece of the skins that they sell. But you need to have skins that are individualized to those champions that are funny and things like that. And they just haven't done good, funny individual skins for a long time. And we've been complaining about that. And hey, they even threw in Braum in there, right? So we have Grill Master Braum. The skin looks glorious. So obviously that's amazing. So we've got Urgot. This looks like, I don't know what this is supposed to be. It's the Clog Father. He's got rubber duckies. He's got a plunger. I don't quite know where this one's going. I think this looks a little bit too much like Braum, to be honest. Maybe it's fine. You should be able to tell from the legs. Pool Party Malphite. I'm a little bit surprised even that they called this one Pool Party Malphite, right? Instead of calling this like Sandcastle Malphite. Again, they've just tried to throw it into the skin theme line. But obviously, regardless of what the name of it is, the name doesn't really matter. This is also a great skin. Pengu Garen goes really hard. That's obviously a great skin. Glizzy Nefiri, the hot dog Nefiri skin, amazing skin. Cat in the Box Shaco seems like a good skin. And then, so let's see what they've done with this patch's skins. Fate Breaker Taric, Malzahar, and Nasus. Victorious Twisted Fate for the end of the first split. And they finally released that super expensive San Uzal Mordekaiser. Honestly, I'm more impressed with what they did last patch than what they did this patch. I think 5 skins, including the Victorious skin, is not that many. This is another thing I've been complaining about. Again, I don't know anything about how long it takes to produce a skin, how many people they have working there, but it's surprising to me that the patches are every 2 weeks, and yet it takes their skin team so much time to make each skin that we're only seeing sometimes 3, 4, 5, 6 skins a patch. I think you can't average 4 or 5 skins a patch. I think that the more that you can put out, the better, obviously. And because it's their way of monetizing the game, I don't really understand why they don't have more people working in the skin department and why they don't put out 10 skins a patch and double the number of people working on the skin team and can some people somewhere else. And I know that's harsh, but I'm a business person. I studied economics, and I've been saying for a long time, I want the game to make as much money as possible so that they keep the servers running for as long as possible. And I don't understand why, from a business perspective, it would make sense to release 4 or 5 skins a patch, especially when, of course, one of them is being given away for free, since the Victorious Twisted Fate skin is just going out to people who played ranked. So that's all that there is to that. There's probably a good reason for it. Obviously, I'm sure if the skin team could produce 10 high-quality skins a patch, they'd probably do it. Obviously, there are some other things to consider about, like, well, if we release 10, maybe they'd sell a little bit less per skin because people aren't going to be able to buy all of them or something like that. But in my head at least, I don't think people are rushing out to buy all 10 skins that would be released in a patch. They're picking up the Braum one because they're a Braum player, picking up the Garen one because they're a Garen player. But again, maybe that's not how it works. So that's the end of the patch. We're back, and we'll be making more videos. With that being said, good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.